The culture of Islam. The objectives are 1. Report the great advances in the areas of mathematics and the natural sciences made by Muslim scholars. And 2, describe how Muslim art and architecture incorporated innovative geometric styles of decoration. Now, really, the preservation of Greek and ancient Western knowledge was preserved by the Arab scholars during the traditional period. We see that many of the works by Plato and Aristotle in particular are translated into the Arabic and preserved in great libraries like the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. We also see that paper manufacturing emerged in Baghdad, influenced from China. We see mathematics were brought to Baghdad from India. And really all of this knowledge begins to be translated in the 12th century to the West. Arabic translations were translated into Latin in the West with the reintroduction of Aristotle and some of Plato and Euclid and various mathematical concepts that really are the springboard from which we see the Renaissance and the reviving of Western knowledge. Here, for example, we see a work of Aristotle in Arabic preserved, which would later be translated into the Latin. Now, of course, we end up seeing this flourishing of philosophy and the sciences and history through this period. We see various commentaries were written by Arabic philosophers such as Ibn Rushd, who lived in Cordoba and wrote commentaries on most of Aristotle's surviving works that in fact become primary commentaries in terms of understanding what Aristotle was saying for the Western mind. We see various contributions to mathematics and the natural sciences, really the adoption of numerical system of India, really the use of zero, which becomes known as the Arabic system, but it's really Indian. And really from this we see the emergence of algebra. Of course, we see this application into astronomy. Astronomy was central to sea travel, particularly the astrolabe, which was used to determine the location of stars and planets. In fact, here, this is what is depicted. Now, to speak about that slightly, just for a moment, we can see that how this worked was one would set their eye on a particular star, a particular astronomical body, and would point a portion of that astrolabe to it. And you were able to, through lining up the device to the horizon, a measurement by which this number could help one navigate and set a proper trajectory and location. Now, of course, we see these major innovations that end up being fundamentally important to human knowledge in general, but influential on the Western world. Muslim scholars also developed medicine as a field of scientific study in general. We see the work of Ibn Sina, for example, who wrote a medical encyclopedia that really stressed the idea of contagious diseases and really the need for clean water in general. We see Ibn Khaldun, the most really prominent Muslim historian of the age. He wrote Muqaddimah, which is the introduction to history. And it really introduces a cyclical view of history. That is, that history isn't on a straight line like we conceive of in the West, but rather that cyclical circle. And things repeat themselves over and over again. And so this becomes a sort of scientific basis for political factors and political systems as they repeat themselves over and over again in a cyclical cycle of human history. Or, for example, literature. Literature is a major innovation that occurs culturally within the Arabic world. We see Islam really brought major changes to the culture of Southwest Asia with the introduction of various literary classics. Rubaiyat, for example, by Omar Khayyam, is the most famous, without question, example of Arabic literature. Often referred to in the English as the 1001 Nights or the Arabian Nights, for example. And really this is a collection of folk tales, fables, and romances, really that blended the natural, historical, political world with the supernatural. Really a means by which you see even a pre-Islamic world and a pre-Islamic fable, folktale being revived through these stories. Famous examples of this would be Aladdin, for example, or Sinbad, some beloved stories, though perhaps dark and holding rich political meaning. Now, of course, we also see major innovations in art and architecture. Really, the best expression of Islamic art in general is the mosque, which really the greatest mosque is the Great Mosque of Samarra in Iraq. But particularly focusing within that mosque, one of the main focal points is the minaret. And now the minaret is essentially a tower from which the muezzin, the crier, calls the faithful to prayer 5 times a day, standing at the top and making their cry. And of course, within all these architectural features, we see complicated geometric methods by which to really express creativity. But you largely see no representations of the Prophet Muhammad. In fact, you see, in general, very few representations at all. Now, this is not, of course, something the Quran forbade, but does find its derivation in the Hadith, which is an early collection of the Prophet's sayings. And they warn against any attempt to imitate God, to really draw pictures of people, really, because this is how God operates. This is how God creates. This is Him. And how dare you capture an image of God or limit God by a particular image? And so these, of course, become major factors that determine the artistic expression of an entire culture, which is, of course, important for us to understand their art and expression culturally through all of these factors. Now, the objectives were, 1, report the great advances in the areas of mathematics and the natural sciences made by Muslim scholars, and 2, describe how Muslim art and architecture incorporate innovative geometric styles of decoration.